Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I always thought grief had a shape, something heavy you could hold, cry into, name. But sitting at my mother's funeral, staring at the polished wood of her coffin, grief felt like smoke, slipping into my lungs, stealing air. Blinding reason, my father wasn't there. He was traveling, his relatives said. I knew better. He was with her, the woman my mother had whispered about through tears, the one whose perfume she found on his shirt, whose name she never spoke but always felt. People murmured condolences and pitied looks. She was too young. Such a kind woman. Your father must be devastated. I wanted to scream that he was with his mistress while we lowered his wife into the ground. By nightfall, the house was silent except for my heartbeat. I sat in my mother's room because it was the only place that still smelled like lavender and safety. Her phone lay on the nightstand. I'd kept it, unable to let go. Then it lit up. A text. From her number. I'm not dead. Come to the cemetery, now. My body went cold so fast I could taste metal. For a full minute, I couldn't move. Logic tried to speak, but grief and hope are louder creatures. I grabbed my keys and drove. The cemetery at night is a different world. Wet earth, breathless air, shadows that look like they remember. My headlights swept over marble and stone until I killed the engine and stepped into the dark. The wind moved like it was whispering someone's name. My mother's grave was easy to find. I'd stared at its fresh soil all morning, but someone else was already there, a woman, facing the headstone, dressed in black. I froze. My voice caught somewhere between terror and rage. She turned. It was my father's mistress, but she wasn't shocked to see me. She looked expectant. I knew you'd come, she said softly. My pulse hammered so hard I could hear it. Why do you have my mother's phone? She didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her coat and held it out, the same phone from my mother's nightstand, screen still glowing. I didn't text you, she said. He did. I spun around, and there, half hidden behind the oaks near the graves, was my father. His face was pale, eyes wide, like someone caught between guilt and ghost stories. He stepped forward slowly, the earth crunching under his shoes. She knew, he said hoarsely. About us. About everything. She confronted me the night before she died. My stomach twisted. What are you saying? He didn't speak. The mistress did. She didn't die the way everyone thinks. It felt like the ground shifted under me. She knelt and pressed her hand against the fresh dirt. She told me he threatened her. Told me she was going to expose everything. Money, affairs, plans. My father stayed silent. But silence can be a confession. The text, the phone, the midnight summons. It wasn't my mother reaching from the grave. It was the truth clawing its way to the surface. I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like his daughter. I felt like a witness. My blood ran cold, not because the dead had spoken, but because the living had buried a lie. That night didn't end at the cemetery. It became the opening to an investigation, a storm, a reckoning. My mother didn't get justice in life, but she would in death. And here's what I learned. Silence protects the wrong people. Doubt is often a warning. And when something inside you says, look again, dig deeper, don't let it go. Listen, because the dead don't always rest until the truth does. I always thought funerals were supposed to feel like closure. But when I sat there in the front pew staring at my mother's coffin, all I felt was unfinished business pressing against my chest like a weight I couldn't breathe around. The chapel was filled with people who had known her. Neighbors, cousins, women from the church choir who dabbed their eyes with tissues while whispering kind words about her gentle heart. They spoke as if she had left us peacefully, as if her story ended neatly, tied up with a ribbon of sympathy and prayer. But nothing about it felt neat to me. My father wasn't there, and his absence was like a thundercloud that no one wanted to point at. They made excuses for him. He's traveling. The loss was too heavy. He couldn't bear to face it. But I knew where he was. He was with her. The mistress. The woman whose name tasted bitter on my mother's tongue every time she hinted at her existence. I sat stiff, my hands clenched into fists on my lap, feeling eyes darting toward me and then away again. Everyone assumed my father was grieving in his own way, but I knew the truth. The night before my mother's accident, I had heard her crying in the kitchen, her voice shaking as she argued with him on the phone. I didn't catch every word, but I caught enough to know she was tired of being humiliated, tired of the lies, tired of living in the shadow of another woman. And now, here I was, burying her while he enjoyed the comfort of the woman who helped break her spirit. The priest's words blurred together as he spoke about eternal rest, about heaven's embrace, about peace. I wanted to scream because none of it matched the storm inside me. Peace didn't exist for my mother in her final days, and it sure didn't exist for me now. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her hands trembling, her lips pressed tightly as if holding back truths too heavy to release. And then I would see my father, carefree, selfish, probably holding someone else's hand while his wife lay in a coffin. When they lowered her casket into the ground, my breath hitched. The sound of earth hitting the lid echoed like gunshots in my chest. People hugged me, pressed tissues into my hands, told me how proud she would be of me for being strong. But I didn't feel strong. I felt betrayed, hollow, and furious. The funeral wasn't just about saying goodbye to my mother. It was about watching the man who should have loved her most choose betrayal over loyalty, absence over presence. And that choice burned hotter than grief. After the funeral, the house felt like a museum of her absence. Every room held a memory, every object carried her warmth, but none of it made sense without her in it. I moved through the silence like I was underwater, every breath thick and heavy. Relatives had filtered out by evening, leaving behind cold teacups, half-folded chairs, and the kind of awkward sympathy that disappears as soon as the door clicks shut behind them. I couldn't bring myself to sleep in my own room, so I ended up in hers, sitting on the edge of her bed and running my fingers along the comforter she used to fold so precisely every morning. Her phone was still on the nightstand. I hadn't had the courage to go through it yet. It felt wrong, intimate, like opening a diary written in heartbreak and unshed tears. But I kept it charged, maybe because part of me wasn't ready to disconnect her from the living world completely. I lay back, staring at the ceiling, replaying the funeral in my mind, the speeches, the whispers, the pitying looks. I thought about my father and the fact that he hadn't even called. Rage and sorrow tangled inside me until I could barely tell one from the other. I must have closed my eyes for only a few minutes, because when the phone lit up on the nightstand, I was still suspended somewhere between exhaustion and disbelief. The sound wasn't loud, just a single vibration against the wood, but it sliced through the silence like a scream. My heart lurched. I knew no one should be using that phone. No one had the number except family, and none of us would dare. I reached for it with shaking hands. The screen glowed in the dark. One new message, from her number. My mother's contact photo, smiling, alive, stared back at me like a ghost with perfect lighting. I opened the message, expecting maybe a glitch or a spam text hijacking an old line. Instead, I saw words that made my entire body go cold in an instant. I'm not dead. Come to the cemetery. Now. I stopped breathing, as if air itself no longer trusted the world around me. I read it once, then again, tracing the letters with my eyes like maybe they would rearrange or disappear. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. Every rational cell in my body screamed that it was impossible, that someone was playing a cruel, sick game. But grief does strange things to logic. It blurs the lines between what you know and what you need. I stood up so fast the bed creaked. For a moment, I just stood there, holding the phone, my hands trembling as though the message itself radiated some kind of cold electricity. My mother was gone. I watched her casket descend. I heard the prayers. I saw the dirt. And yet, here was her voice in text, commanding me to go to the one place I never wanted to see again. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't stop to think about safety or reason or what waited for me in the dark. My mind was a war between terror and hope, and both were winning. I grabbed my keys, clutched the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white, and headed for the door with only one thought looping through my head. What if it wasn't a joke? What if somehow, impossibly, she needed me? The night felt wrong the moment I stepped outside, like the air itself knew something I didn't. The sky was moonless, thick with clouds that swallowed every flicker of light. I got into the car without thinking, my fingers stiff on the steering wheel, my mother's phone still clutched in my other hand like proof I hadn't imagined it. The driveway, the streetlights, even the trees lining the road looked unfamiliar, as though grief had redrawn the world when I wasn't paying attention. I drove faster than I should have, but every mile between me and the cemetery felt unbearable. My thoughts were a blur of memories and fear. My mother brushing my hair when I was little, her quiet humming while cooking, the tired way she'd smiled at me the week before she died. Then I'd see the message again in my mind, bright as a scream. I'm not dead. Come to the cemetery. Now. My pulse pounded so loudly that I could feel it in my wrists, my throat, my temples. With every turn, I kept glancing at the rearview mirror even though I didn't know what I was looking for. Part of me expected to see headlights behind me, or a silhouette in the back seat, or my mother's face staring at me through the glass the way she used to when she waited up late for me to come home. The silence in the car was unbearable, but I didn't turn on the radio. The world felt too fragile to fill with noise. As I neared the cemetery road, the streetlights thinned out until darkness swallowed everything but my headlights. The gate loomed ahead, tall and iron-wrought, the kind that creaks in horror movies right before something awful happens. I remembered walking through those gates that morning in daylight, surrounded by people and flowers and condolences. Now, alone in the dark, it felt like stepping into the mouth of something ancient and hungry. The gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled off the main road and onto the narrow path leading in. The cemetery stretched out in uneven rows of stone and shadow, each headstone catching the light in flashes as I passed. I didn't know where to park, didn't even consider if I should call someone first. My chest felt tight with dread, but something deeper, something I couldn't name, pulled me forward. I turned off the engine, and the sudden stillness was deafening. No cars, no voices, just wind moving through the trees and the soft hiss of distant traffic that didn't belong to this place. I sat there for a moment, my hand still gripping the wheel, staring through the windshield at the faint outline of my mother's section in the distance. I swallowed hard, opened the door, and stepped out. The air was colder than it had any right to be for that time of year, sharp and damp like it had risen straight from the soil. Each step I took over the gravel and grass echoed louder than it should have, as if the ground hadn't heard footsteps in years. Fear curled around my spine, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. My heart knew the way before my mind did, pulling me toward the fresh mound of earth where I'd watched them lower her casket just hours before. And with every step closer to her grave, one thought repeated in my head, steady, relentless, and wild. What if she's there? What if she's waiting? I didn't realize I was holding my breath until I saw the silhouette. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The darkness had a way of bending shapes, turning headstones into people and trees into shadows that breathed. But this wasn't a trick. Someone was standing at my mother's grave. A woman. Perfectly still like she'd been waiting. Every instinct in my body jolted at once. My steps slowed, then stopped altogether, but my heartbeat kept racing forward without me. The grass was soft beneath my shoes, damp from evening dew or maybe something else, and the air around the fresh earth felt colder than the rest of the night. I could smell roses, oversweet and wilted, mixed with something metallic that made the back of my throat tighten. Her back was to me, and the curve of her shoulders, the way her hair fell, sent a flicker of familiarity through me that I couldn't place at first. I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came out, just a ghost of breath. She turned before I could try again, slowly, deliberately. My stomach dropped. It was her, the woman my father had chosen over his wife. The woman whose existence had carved silent wounds into my mother's heart long before she died. The mistress. In the glow of the cemetery's dim pathway light, her face didn't look smug or guilty the way I always imagined it. She looked pale, almost frightened, as if she'd seen something she wished she could unsee. For a moment, neither of us moved. We just stared at each other across that small stretch of dirt that held everything we'd both lost and broken. Anger flared hot in my chest, but confusion tangled with it until I couldn't tell one from the other. "What are you doing here?" The words came out shakier than I wanted, barely more than a whisper. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she glanced down at the grave, then back at me with eyes that looked too wide, too alert. And then she did something I didn't expect. She held out my mother's phone. Not a phone like hers. Not a duplicate. The exact one I had left charging on the nightstand. The same case. The same cracked corner. The same background photo of me and my mom from 2 summers ago. My breath stuttered. I knew I hadn't brought it with me. I remembered leaving it glowing on the bed before I ran out of the house. But there it was, in her hand, lit up with the message that had dragged me here like a hook under my ribs. "I didn't text you," she said finally. Her voice was steady, but too soft, like she was afraid volume might wake something. He did. The words hit me like ice water. Before I could understand, before I could speak, the sound of footsteps behind me made the ground tilt under my feet. I turned and my father stepped into view from the shadows of the trees. His face looked drained, tight, like someone who hadn't slept or someone who'd been hiding in the dark long enough to become part of it. My throat closed. Seeing him there at her grave at midnight, with that woman, with that phone, made the world tilt into something I didn't recognize. All the lies, all the whispers, all the things left unsaid between us seemed to gather in the cold night air, watching and waiting. He didn't speak at first. His eyes flicked to the grave, then to me, then to the woman holding the phone like a cursed object passed between the living and the dead. The silence felt heavy, unnatural, like it belonged to something older than grief. And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't let myself consider, not fully, not out loud. Whatever had pulled me to the cemetery that night wasn't random. Whatever secrets were buried with my mother hadn't stayed in the ground. The truth was here, standing in the dark with me, and it was about to surface, whether I was ready or not. For a moment, none of us spoke. The wind moved through the trees with a low rustle, like the earth itself was listening. My father stood a few feet away, and in the dim light I could finally see his face clearly. He looked nothing like the grieving widower people pictured when they spoke his name with pity. His jaw was tight. His eyes darted between me, the mistress, and the grave like he was calculating something. How much I knew, how much she knew, how much could still be buried before daylight came. The mistress, no. The woman held the phone out a little farther, the screen reflecting off her trembling fingers. "Tell her," she said quietly, not looking at me but at him. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a warning disguised as calm. He didn't move. Didn't reach for the phone. I could see something shifting behind his eyes, a crack in whatever story he had rehearsed. I took a step toward the grave, and the weight of what I was standing on settled into my bones. This wasn't just a midnight meeting or a cruel prank. This was a moment that split life into before and after. "You texted me from her phone," I said, my voice barely holding steady. "Why?" His mouth parted, but before he could form a lie or an excuse, the woman spoke again, this time louder. "Because she was going to talk." She was done staying silent. The words rippled through me like a shock. My breath caught. I stared at her, then at him, and for the first time, I saw fear on his face, not of me, but of what might come next. His shoulders rose and fell with a shaky inhale. "She threatened to expose everything," he said finally, his voice low and uneven. "The money, the accounts, the affair. She said she'd leave and take you with her. Make sure everyone knew who I really was." A cold, searing stillness settled over me. I heard the words but couldn't swallow them. The grave at my feet suddenly felt too shallow to hold the truth that was starting to surface. The woman stepped closer to the mound of earth, her gaze fixed on it like she could see through the soil. "She called me," she said, softer now. "The night before she died. She wasn't calling to threaten me. She was warning me. She said things were going to get ugly. She said she was scared of him." My father closed his eyes, and for a beat, he looked like someone who had finally run out of exits. The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It was thick, heavy, alive. I could feel the truth pressing at the edges, ready to break open. Standing there between the living and the dead, something in me shifted. The fear that had dragged me to the cemetery was changing shape into something sharper, something clearer. I wasn't just a daughter mourning her mother anymore. I was a witness standing at the edge of a secret that had claws. And once you see the shape of the darkness, you can't pretend it was only a shadow. I didn't know what would come next. Police, confessions, investigations, but I knew this. My mother hadn't left this world quietly. Her silence had been forced, and whatever had been buried with her wasn't going to stay hidden much longer. The cemetery didn't feel empty anymore. It felt awake, like the ground itself had been waiting for someone to finally listen. I stood between my father and the woman he'd chosen over my mother, and for the first time since losing her, I didn't feel powerless. I took the phone from the mistress's hand. My mother's lock screen lit up. That familiar photo of us smiling on a summer day. Her arm around me, her eyes soft but tired in a way I hadn't understood back then. Now I did. Now I saw all the way through it. My father tried to speak, but I didn't let him. I didn't need lies, excuses, or some broken version of remorse. "You're going to tell the police," I said, my voice steady, even though my insides trembled. "And if you don't, I will." He didn't argue. Maybe he knew he'd already lost his last defense. Maybe my mother had already taken it with her when she died. The mistress didn't run or deny anything. She just stood there, arms wrapped around herself, like she was cold from the inside out. Maybe she was guilty. Maybe she was scared. Maybe both. But she wasn't my concern anymore. I turned back to the grave. The flowers had begun to sag into the soil, their stems darkened with damp. I knelt down and placed the phone on the earth, pressing my palm against the dirt the way my mother used to press her hand to my back when she hugged me. I didn't speak out loud, but I thought the words clearly enough for the night to hear. "I'm here. I know, I won't let them bury the truth with you." By the time I stood, something inside me had shifted. Grief reshaped into resolve. I wasn't leaving that cemetery with fear tangled in my throat anymore. I was leaving with purpose. With anger sharpened into clarity. With love reborn as fight. The police got involved within hours. Interviews, statements, questions that made my father flinch. Questions that made the mistress fold in on herself. Things came out. Documents, messages, financial trails, arguments neighbors overheard, a bruise a friend remembered seeing. Nothing stayed buried the way he'd hoped. But this wasn't just about justice in a courtroom. It was about something bigger, about not letting silence win. My mother had tried to speak before she died, and someone tried to silence her. I had spent weeks believing she left this world unheard. But she wasn't done. She found a way to make me look closer, dig deeper, follow the tremor in my gut. People think hauntings are about ghosts coming back. I don't. I think hauntings are about truths that refuse to stay buried. And if there's one lesson I'll carry until my last breath, it's this. When something inside you whispers that the story isn't over, listen. When a silence feels wrong, trust it. When the dead leave traces behind, follow them. Because sometimes justice doesn't start in the light. It starts in the dark, in the silence, in the place where the truth was first buried. And that night in the cemetery, I stopped mourning and started digging.